We're really excited to see you. And this is a big day for us also because we are so glad to have Scott Forman, who is our partner. He's waving his hand there, and he is the founder and leader of VoteForward, our letter writing organization that we've worked with for a couple of years now. Anyway, we love Scott. We're glad to see him. I'm going to open this meeting for a few minutes and just talk about letter writing and talk about Big Tent. So give me just a couple minutes here to talk about who we are in case some of you don't know. Big Tent is an organization that was formed during the 2020 election time to educate and activate. And what we do is we have a lecture series, which is fabulous. You should all be signed up and you should all be getting notifications of these wonderful lectures that we have coming up. And there are 3 spotlight speakers coming up. They are Wednesday, the 27th of this month, Nancy Northrup of the Center of Reproductive Rights. A lot of important information there. You should all be there. On November 10th, we have a spotlight speaker who is Jennifer Rubin, the Washington Post columnist and author, whose book is about how women have helped shape this last election and what a difference the women have made. So we feel a part of that. And then on December 1st, there is Charles Whelan, the founder and co-chair of Unite America. So we've got lots of great stuff coming up. Also, next week, we have another Tent Talk. So Tent Talk are our afternoon talks and activism talks, which is where we are right now. You are in a Tent Talk. And next week, we have another one, which is Emiliana Guereca, who is the founder and executive director of Women's March Action, who is starting a new postcarding campaign and launching different movements against corporations who are supporting insurrectionists, etc. So next week will be another good one. I hope we'll see all of you there again. Now, as I said, we educate, but we activate, and we do some real activism, and that's what we do here at Tent Talk. We have been writing our Vote Forward letters now for quite a while, and I have my handful of, oh dear, I'm on blur, so you can't see me, but I have my letters that I'm writing to Virginia, encouraging people to vote for the governor's election that's coming up. So all of these letters are going to go out on Saturday, the 16th, this Saturday. And if any of you right now need letters, we have them. You just have to put a note in the chat or wave your hands or do something. Susan, who it says Big Tent USA, she will send you a packet of letters right now for anyone who needs them. What we've done traditionally is sit here and write them as we talk and listen. And we help each other. I show you in the past, I've shown what I've written. And like Donna was saying just now, she uses colored pens. We draw pictures. I draw smiley faces. I write vote in big letters and exclamation points and underline. And I try to make it look like a human being was behind this letter. It was not just printed out and sent. So anyway, I encourage you all to participate in this. It's a feel-good thing that we all do to help save our democracy from all kinds of forces out there. And so if anybody here needs letters, we are strongly encouraging, we have them for you and we'll send them to you right away. What you'll do is they'll come in an email and you can start working on them. And if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat and or ask me at the end. So at the end, we'll stay on for a few minutes if anybody has questions about letter writing and wants to go over anything. Okay. And as I said, we are at Big Tent, a group of, well, there's a spectrum of political beliefs but we all are striving to stay in the middle where we can speak to each other and help each other and do the right thing to save democracy, to elect good people to do the right thing for our country. And we want everyone to feel good about that and invite your friends to join us. So we hope you'll invite your friends to be part of the Big Tent. All right. Susan, is there anything I've forgotten? Oh, you're muted.
I think it's great. I think it's great. If you do sign up for the Jennifer Rubin, the first 50 people do get the book sent to them, either in ebook form or in hardcover. So if you do want to get the book, it's a great book. And then you can read it before she comes. Otherwise, that's it.
Okay, great. And yeah, I really am, I'm personally all over this corporate challenge to AT&T. Is that I'm making that my personal mission. This week, I have canceled 6 phone lines from AT&T. My entire family, I'm making them switch. We are, I mean, I don't care where you go, but AT&T has lost all my goodwill in Texas. And so that's what I'm working on. I'm writing a letter to the corporate leadership. I'm changing my phone. Okay, now for today, we are so lucky to have Scott Forman back. He's one of our heroes, one of our friends, a partner to Big Tent. And do you have a dog, Scott? Someone has a dog. Okay. Hello, dog. Scott is going to tell us about all the wonderful work that we have done along with him, but also everything that his organization's been up to. He has a lot of current information and studies that they've done, a lot of good things to tell us. And really, we who have been on the front lines working with him, it's really great to have the chance for him to tell us what we've done and what he's done and what he has planned for us to do in the future. So, Scott, I'm turning it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Karen. And it's great to see you all. I'm glad to be back. You all were reminding me this is the second time I've been here, and I think the first time was in the heat of the 2020 campaign. And it all seems like a blur now, but it is nice to be here again, and maybe under slightly more slightly calmer circumstances, but I'm glad to have a chance to tell you about the work that we're doing and also our plans for the future a little bit. And then I want to try to leave a lot of time for questions also. So I have some slides. I'm going to share my screen here and try to run through them pretty quickly, again, to leave time for questions. And some of this may be familiar to many of you. So especially if you were at the webinar that we delivered a couple of weeks ago to talk about the 2020 results that we've recently published. But I'll go through it again, and glad to do it in a small group. And if it's new to you, that's great. And if it isn't, then we can get into more depth in whatever questions you have for me. All right, let's get started. VoteForward, as I think many of you probably know, is a 501c4 nonprofit organization. So that means that we have a core social mission, which we characterize as empowering grassroots volunteers like you all to encourage fellow citizens to participate in our democracy, with a particular focus on people who are from underrepresented communities. So in practice, that means people of color for the most part. We also, as a 501c4, do some partisan work. It just has to be less than 50% of what we do. So what you'll see when you work with us is that there's often a choice between a campaign that focuses on our core social mission and a campaign that focuses on explicitly partisan goals. And that's a choice that you can make. It's also one of the nice things about our structure is that it allows us to have partnerships with organizations on both sides of that fence. So we work with both other 501c4s, political action committees, and then we also have partnerships with 501c3s and corporate entities that are less able to or less interested in doing explicitly partisan work. So that's our mission and our tax structure. It's funny, it's always necessary to start there somehow, because it makes a big difference in the kinds of work that different organizations can do. And then I'll just talk a little bit about the history of the organization. So we're relatively young. I started this in 2017 with a randomized trial that I conducted kind of from my kitchen table. I had been nursing this idea for a long time that handwritten letters might have a significant impact on voter turnout. And I, based on my background in a little bit in social science and then some with technology and even some direct mail experience, what I concluded was that the best way to find out whether it worked was to just try it. So those very first 1,000 letters that I sent in 2017, those were for the Alabama Senate election between Doug Jones and Roy Moore. In that trial, I was able to show that they had an impact, a really kind of startling impact on voter turnout, increasing the turnout between the comparing the treatment group of 1,000 voters to the control group by more than 3 percentage points, which is kind of a shocking number for voter turnout campaigns. So on the basis of that experiment, I decided to devote the next couple of years of my professional life to the project. I thought that what we did in 2018 was huge. We sent, I think, about 1 million letters for the midterms, and there were more than 50,000 volunteers who participated. And it turned out that that was just getting started because over the next couple of years, after kind of resetting up the organization and professionalizing it and hiring a few people, we were able to make our 2020 campaign, I think as many of you know, enormous. So we, over the course of 2020, and this is including both the general election and some of the other special elections and the Senate runoffs in Georgia, there were more than 21.6 million letters that got sent by more than 250,000 volunteers and 54 partner organizations. And so I think it's safe to say that in just a few years, VoteForward has built one of the premier voter contact platforms in the progressive space. So yeah, that's it's been quite a ride the last couple of years, and it's gotten to the point where it's deployable at a pretty big scale, and very exciting. So what's our vision for what we want this to be? So the way I think about this is that the goal for VoteForward is to be an engine for voter contact at scale in the so-called on years. So even numbered years. You've seen that we can, with the support of volunteers like you, we can do these enormous campaigns, and we're going to keep doing that because we've seen over and over again that the tactic is effective. And in every even numbered year, whether it's a midterm election or a presidential election, there's going to be a profound need for voter turnout to be nudged up along the margins of the populations that we're working with. So we're pretty well down this path, but we still see a significant opportunity to continue to improve and scale it up even further. We are constrained in part by the number of voters that there are to target. But if you look at the next couple of years, there are many voters that need our attention. So just back of the envelope math for 2022, it's pretty clear that there's a pathway to us sending 30 million letters. So making it even bigger than it was last year. That's the goal. We also think of it as a engine of innovation, especially in the off years. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a moment. But we think there's a big need here to continue to do the kind of research that we've been doing. And we want to play a bigger role in that and do more of it. So that's the other ambition that we have for the next couple of years. Just characterizing the way that we think about the work that we do, it's partner friendly, it's scientifically rigorous, it's enabled by technology, it's highly efficient, and it's media savvy. So just to run through those real quickly, you may or may not have seen this, but we did do a lot of work to bring in a big coalition of other partner organizations last year. So these are just a few examples. But in the end, there were a total of 54 different organizations, and they were either directly or indirectly responsible for more than 40% of the total number of letters that were written. So there's a bunch of organic activity that happens in the VoteForward community. So people telling their friends about VoteForward, and a lot of the growth was driven by that. But also, and a little bit under the radar, we wound up building this really big coalition of other partner organizations that find the work that we do really valuable. And it means that they have a way to activate their volunteers that's very, very easy for them, which I think they tend to appreciate. And as I mentioned earlier, we occupy a convenient spot on the partisan, nonpartisan spectrum that allows us to work with both explicitly partisan and more socially conscious organizations like other 501c3s. Scientifically rigorous. So this is kind of at the core of everything that we do. Most of our campaigns are randomized controlled trials. And we've been able to show very consistently over the years that turnout, the letters that we write are one of the most effective methods to increase voter turnout, especially from a distance. Pretty much everything we do when we innovate is tested at a small scale before we try to deploy it at a bigger scale, which I think is really important because we want to make sure that we're always and only recommending tactics that we really have a lot of confidence in. And just to linger on these numbers for a minute, these are really big effects. So that first trial in Alabama, subsequent trials in Maine, Ohio, Virginia in 2019, multiple percentage point effects on voter turnout are essentially make this one of the most effective known tactics for increasing voter turnout. It's a little hard to share all of the details about the comparison because some of the data that we have access to is private, as through this group called the Analyst Institute that collects and promulgates data about campaigns and trials that other groups have done. But based on our reading of the historical research, these are really big effects, and so we feel pretty confident that this is one of the most effective things that you can do, comparable to the gold standard tactics that you might know of, like knocking on people's doors. My background is in technology, so wait, let me ask a question here. Can you all see my screen? You can, okay, you can see the slides. Okay, I wasn't sure for a second. Good. So my background is in technology, and so the structure of the team is largely focused on building products and doing research. The campaigns are all free for volunteers and partners to use, and we've done a lot of work, and I appreciate your noticing some of this to make it as easy as we possibly can, both for partners and for volunteers. There's always more work for us to do here, and we have a lot of product improvements that we want to make. But I think we've done a pretty good job of making it accessible to a wide population of users on the internet. And it also means that it's pretty efficient. So 250,000 volunteers, we actually did read every single one of their applications to be a volunteer. But because we had some really smart technology around it, we were able to do that with a tiny staff. So we're only 4 people full-time at the moment. And so it has this property of having enormous leverage, tiny staff, giant impact. And that I think comes largely from the technology that we've been able to build. It's a pretty complicated system now. And we've had some very talented engineers working on it over the last couple of years. I write a little code, but not that much. I've been fortunate to work with colleagues who are very, very good at this stuff. And yeah, so again, it's very efficient. 21.6 million letters prepped in the 2020 cycle. That translates to about $14 million in effective sort of matching contributions almost from the volunteer base. As you know, the structure of the program is that the volunteers contribute the postage with some exceptions. But that means that from the perspective of donors to VoteForward and the operations of the program itself, there's this huge lever that we get to pull. So pretty small team, pretty small operational budget, gigantic impact out in the world, thanks to the multiplier effect of the extraordinary contributions that the volunteers like you all are making in terms of covering the costs of the postage and the printing and so on and so forth. We do also feel very conscious of the fact that those contributions are not possible for everybody to make. We're grateful for those who can, but we've been experimenting over the last couple of years, and we want to do more of this with directly subsidizing some of the postage costs and the supplies costs through donations to VoteForward that we then use to purchase those supplies for volunteers who otherwise wouldn't be able to participate. And I think that's really important because we focus mostly on the effect that the program has on the voters who receive these communications, but I think it actually has a pretty profound effect on the people who write them also. And we'd like to make that more accessible to more people who might not otherwise be able to do it. And media savvy. This is not my expertise, but I have some colleagues who are very good at this stuff. We have managed to make it pretty culturally salient. So some of you might remember last year we had the cast of Hamilton supporting our work, and we did a big event with them. Kevin Bacon and Kira Sedgwick are recurring letter writers, and it's always really fun to see them get into the action. And then Keiko Agena has done some great work for us and is one of our big supporters. So we've managed to make it a bit of a cultural thing, which is exciting, and I think helps us grow the crew of people who are excited about doing this kind of civic work. And then just to speak a little bit more to the innovation agenda, we do perceive there to be a bit of a problem in the civic engagement space, that campaigns and organizations tend to use the same tactics and not do a whole lot of innovation cycle over cycle. I think that's largely a function of not having the funding to maintain those kinds of programs and having relatively short interests and agendas that are really focused on the short term or the medium term. And we think that VoteForward can play a pretty significant role in building a longer term agenda for doing research and trying to innovate. So that's why we have this program that we call VoteForward Labs, which is the place where we do innovative, bold research that we're not so sure at the outset how well it's going to work. So this is essentially taking the pattern that VoteForward started with, which is we have a hypothesis about something that might work, and we're just going to test it. And then only once we have demonstrated that it does work, are we going to try to scale it up and make it a thing that we encourage lots of people to do. We've kept that pattern, and the place that we do it is in VoteForward Labs. So this year, for instance, we have a bunch of different campaigns that were more experimental. And depending on what we learn from them, we will scale those things up, scale up the things that work for next year. And in this way, we think we can build a culture that is continually improving on the tactics that we have. And I think that's pretty unusual for the campaign space and the civic engagement space. And we're excited to build more of that into, build a somewhat bigger and more capable team to do this kind of work. So that's on the agenda as well. Just to give a little flavor of some of the experiments that we've done this year. So these are the kinds of things that we're talking about when we talk about VoteForward Labs. We have a campaign that just ended last week where we're sending letters in both English and Spanish to Latinx voters in Atlanta and Miami to see if that has a bigger effect. If it does, that's something we'll scale up to be much bigger next year. We've continued to experiment with bolstering the case for vote by mail. So we think that's going to continue to be a significant part of the electoral system, and even more so. It's not going away even as we start to emerge from the COVID pandemic. And we've been able to show, as you may have seen, that we can have a pretty significant impact, not just on voter turnout, but also on the method by which people vote. So we have, in these Virginia campaigns that you may be aware of, we've had two different layers. The first layer focusing on vote by mail, and the second layer focusing on GOTV. We have some historical evidence that that is effective, and we're going to find out even more from these Virginia campaigns. If it works well, we'll scale that up to be bigger next year. And then I think maybe my favorite is we did a campaign earlier this year where we encouraged volunteers to write a very particular kind of message on their letters. People have been asking us for years, what's the most effective thing to write? And we haven't historically known the answer. So based on some research in the behavioral psychology realm, we designed this test where we had some volunteers write unconstrained messages. So we didn't really ask people to do anything special. And then we had a separate arm in which we asked people to write very emotion-laden personal stories. And we're able to show that the personal story version was actually quite a bit, or at least a little bit more effective than the standard version. And so I even found for myself that it changed the nature of the messages that I've been writing on these letters to Virginia for this year. And I think that as we experiment more with that kind of tactic, we might discover that if it really is significantly more effective and we're able to replicate that result, we'll probably build that into the product in a more serious way and make it a standard part of what we ask people to do. Lots of experiments that we would like to do given more capacity. So we're still interested in voter registration. We want to test what kind of work we can do to get voters registered from afar, especially in collaboration with groups that have a lot of local knowledge. Other experiments around messaging. We want to know whether it's more effective to write to somebody with whom you share a particular affinity. Maybe it's something about a specific issue or something about your background. We're interested in testing letters for persuasion. So not just voter turnout, but can we change people's vote preferences by having peer-to-peer communication between citizens? If we're able to demonstrate that, that would be another powerful tactic in the arsenal. And then we're also continuing to experiment with multiple modes of communication. So the mail is obviously our best friend, but it's not our only friend. We think that there's at least a possibility that combining letters with SMS messages, phone calls, or in-person communication could be more effective than either one of them alone. And we're very interested in testing that kind of thing as well. Okay, so that's all big picture context about who we are and what we're doing. I want to zoom in on one particular aspect of our work, which is the results of the experiment that we built into the campaign that we ran last year. Some of you may have seen this already, but I'll run through it again just for good measure. So just as a reminder, last year, as part of the Big Send, so this is just for the general election, there were more than 200,000 volunteers who participated. This number is wrong, it should say 54 partners. And more than 17, I think now 17.6 million letters confirmed sent to 21 states. It was big, and it worked. So the spoiler alert is that it worked. As a reminder, for those of you who may be a little bit unfamiliar, the way that this experiment works, just like all the other experiments that we run, is by randomizing between a control group and a treatment group. So for the Big Send in 2020, we held out control groups of about 5% of the total population of voters. We sent letters to everybody else. And then after the election is over and we get all the data back about who voted and who didn't, we compare the percentage of the people who got letters, who voted, to the percentage of the people who were in the control group who voted. And we measure our impact by the difference between those two numbers. So that's more or less how all of these randomized trials work. For the Big Send, we were cautious about what we expected. In presidential years like last year, many experiments that we're aware of report effect sizes of a few hundredths of a percentage point or even no observable effect. That doesn't necessarily mean that those things didn't work. It just means that it's really hard to detect effects at all in presidential cycles because they're so noisy. If you think about the people in Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania, they were being bombarded by communications for months, including ours. And the people that were in our control group were in everybody else's treatment groups. It's just really messy. And so it's hard to really find a signal in that sort of environment. So we were not expecting to see a giant number here. The experiments were originally powered to detect an effect size of about 0.2 percentage points, which, to be clear, would be fantastic in a presidential year. We would be very happy with that. In the end, our best estimate of the effect size from the experiment that was embedded in the campaign is that it was a 0.8 percentage point difference in turnout between the treatment group and the control group. And that is a giant effect for a presidential year. So we were really thrilled to see this. And what it means, if you extrapolate it out to the entire population of people that we wrote to, is that we think we probably caused something like 126,000 votes to be cast that wouldn't otherwise have been cast. And this is obviously a pretty, at least potentially electorally significant number, particularly when you put it in the context of some of Biden's win margins in some of these very close elections. So 10,000 votes in Arizona, 12,000 votes in Georgia, 20,000 votes in Wisconsin. We're not saying that we flipped the results. We can't say that because of the limitations of the experiment and the fact that these things are always murky and overdetermined. There were lots of factors that contributed to all of this, and even we actually even don't look explicitly at Democratic turnout on the C3 side of our work. So there's some constraints about what we are even allowed to say. But we feel pretty confident that the work that you all did and that all these volunteers did had a significant impact on the shape of the electorate in a way that may very well have had some electoral impacts. And so that's my cautious phrasing of the thing that I am really proud of from last year. I'll leave it there. So it's big, really, really big. It's also extraordinarily cost effective. So I'm going to speak now from the perspective of VoteForward's donors. So this is not including the cost of the stamps and the postage and whatnot. Not to say that those things aren't significant, they're huge. That was a gigantic in-kind donation that every volunteer made who participated. But VoteForward from the perspective of the donors who help fund our work, so to pay our salaries and to run the software and all this stuff, they are mostly interested in the cost effectiveness from the perspective of our budget. So if we do that calculation using our best estimate of the effect size of 0.8 percentage points, our best estimate of the net votes we caused, and our 2020 budget, which was about 1.7 million, that yields an approximate cost per vote of $14, which another way to say that is that for every $1,000 of VoteForward contributions that donors made last year, we think we produced approximately 74 votes. That's what VPK refers to. Costs per net vote in the hundreds or even thousands of dollars in a presidential election are the norm. So one of the most successful campaigns that I'm aware of from last year, they reported a net Democratic vote cost number of, I think, $300 some. I have a friend who was talking to a bunch of people who were trying to convince him to give money to various campaigns, who said that he thought that best guess, you might see $5,000 per net vote in a presidential election cycle as the average. People don't talk about this very much because it's pretty dispiriting. Like if you think about it from the perspective of like the solicitations to donate to candidates that you get, the truth is they don't really go that far. And so we are very proud of this number as well, because what it means is that VoteForward is punching way above its weight in terms of our budget. Even if you use a more conservative estimate for the effect size, even if you think it's 1/10 of what we saw, this is still probably one of the best deals in turning out additional votes that can be found out there in the world. And the same is true from the perspective of volunteers. The number would be bigger. It would be more like, I think, $70 some per net vote if you include the postage costs and everything. That's still, potentially an order of magnitude better than any other investment that you could make in turning out voters. So we feel really good about this. It's a little bit difficult to talk about because most people don't publish these numbers, but based on the research that we've seen in the Analyst Institute, we feel really good about our cost efficiency. Okay, so upshot of all of that, and I'm going to try to finish quickly because I know I'm running short on time. VoteForward letters in 2020, the ones that you wrote, were among the highest impact and most cost-effective voter turnout programs that have ever been measured in a presidential election. So yay, congratulations, and thank you. The research that underlies that claim has also been peer-reviewed by an organization called the Analyst Institute, and they've endorsed and replicated our conclusions. So we feel like it's a pretty solid conclusion. I'll just say really quickly, with an eye on some photos, some of the highlights of photos that people shared last year. We tried to set the stage for all of this to happen, but it only happened because of all of you, people who wrote letters at their kitchen tables and then on Zoom, and met at the mailbox on mail day. And we just can't say enough how grateful we are to all of you for powering this work and being a game to participate in what I think is a really important contribution to the fabric of our civic society. Gesturing a little bit towards the future. So this is a cliche, but it's true. Midterms are about turnout, and the stakes are still very, very high for next year. We think that based on our back of the envelope calculations about our likely targeting, that it's pretty clear that we can see a road to sending 30 million letters. And that's going to take, I think, a lot of work on the partnership side, on the marketing side. But we think we can do it. And we think we need to in order to help defend these very fragile majorities in the Senate and the House. You asked us to say a little bit about what our needs are as an organization. So our budget for the entire 2021 and 22 cycle, so that's this year, next year, is 3.2 million. This is a little bit more than our historical run rate. And the main reason is that we have a staff right now of only 4 full-time people, which is not enough. We kind of desperately need to hire some more team members to help us scale this operation and make it actually work for next year, including another data analyst, a program manager, and a couple of software engineers. It is no longer really reasonable for me to be writing code in the middle of the night. And so I need some help, which is why we're being a little bit more ambitious about what we're trying to raise on the fundraising side for the next couple years. The breakdown in that number is roughly 75-25 between C3 funding and C4 funding. So we have what's called a fiscal sponsor that allows us to accept tax deductible contributions. Those are the C3 contributions. And then as a 501c4, we are able to take donations directly through Act Blue, and those are the minority of the need. Most of our needs at this point are on the tax deductible side of the tax law. And just in terms of our sort of end of the year fundraising, we're going to do a combination of grassroots fundraising and reaching out to various major donors who are eager to fund this kind of work. We're trying to secure 2.4 million in commitments by December 31st. So the purpose of this is to double our experimental capacity, support hopefully 75 organizations is our rough goal for next year through partnerships, and then scale up the flagship turnout program to up to 30 million letters for the 2020 cycle. We maybe we'll have a chance to share a link as well, but this is just the slide from our webinar a couple of weeks ago. That QR code points to our Act Blue page. And then, as you know, because Karen described it, we also have these active Vote Virginia campaigns, which we're trying to finish up over the next few days for the mail date on Saturday. And with that, I'll just say thank you again for having me. I really enjoyed seeing you all again, and want to say a giant thanks for all of the work that you've done and for your support over the last couple of years. And if you have questions, we should do questions now, but also you should feel free to contact me or my colleague, Adam Blackwell, who's also here anytime about VoteForward and what we're working on. So let's adjourn the slide part of this, and happy to take questions.
Great. Wow. Thank you, Scott, for so much interesting detail from the 2020 election. And it's very clear that you are someone who's very data driven. And I think all of us really appreciate that, because as you referenced, the cost of motivating voters is pretty staggering. And it does sound like your kitchen table idea has proven very effective. And I think as a letter writer, I don't want to speak for everyone personally, but the idea of sort of having a letter that's framed for us, but being able to personalize it seems to really just make a lot of sense. And it sounds like it also makes a lot of sense for the voters we're trying to reach too. So great idea. And thanks for running with it.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that was part of the original idea, was like this form, the letter having the form of both some pre-set content and then a personalized component. And although we've continued to experiment with different versions of that pattern really does seem to be pretty solid. And so I think that a lot of the work we do will have that characteristic.
Great. Okay. Well, there were a few questions in the chat. I know we're kind of running out of time, but really very quickly, can you just, I know we're trying to really work with underrepresented voters. Can you just describe to us like how you find them, where you get your lists, and why you pick the states that you do quickly?
Sure. Yes. Oh, okay. So ultimately all of the data that we use comes from state authorities, secretaries of state, boards of election, et cetera. We have a vendor called TargetSmart that we actually buy the data from, because they add a layer of additional predictive modeling. So things like they're combining the official data with commercial data. They try to figure out who's likely to vote for Democrats, who's likely to have particular ethnic background. So we use a national voter file from TargetSmart to identify those voters. On the C3 side of the fence, it is, as we said, voters of color. So Hispanic, Black voters, Native American, and Asian is usually the criteria that we use. And then on the C4 side of the fence, we use what's called a partisan score, which is a prediction about how likely somebody is to vote for Democrats if they vote at all. Our usual threshold for partisanship is 80. So what we're saying there is that in those C4 partisan campaigns, there's a greater than 8 in 10 chance that the person will vote for a Democrat. And those models tend to be pretty well calibrated over time. So that's kind of the short version of how we do the targeting. But there's some more nuance beneath it, but that's the overall story. Hopefully that helps clarify.
Yeah, that's very helpful. We sent out so many letters, which is very exciting. How many got returned, and are you sort of cleaning up those lists? And the follow-up to that is, if we're increasing by 10 million sent 20 million, right, letters in 2020, is reconnecting to the voters that we've already connected with an important element of getting them back engaged in 2022? And then is the 10 million new voters that you want to target, or is this a whole new batch?
So there's definitely some overlap. But the targeting for next year is different. It will inevitably include a lot of competitive House races in states that we didn't write to at all last year. So California, for instance, will have some competitive House races that we want to have an influence on. And those are people that VoteForward has probably never written to. And then in some states, there will certainly be people who we're trying to connect with again. The voter file is pretty mutable over time. So people move, people register, people pass away. So I don't actually know off the top of my head how much, like what percentage of people will be repeats next year versus previous campaigns. Some percentage of them. And it is an active research question for us, whether the effect gets magnified over time. Like if we write to the same person over multiple election cycles, can we, maybe there's a thing we can do that makes it more of a habit for them. Like it might have a durable impact on the way that people vote over time. I hope that's true. We haven't really had a chance to conduct a rigorous experiment on that question yet. But I think it's an interesting thing to explore for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard that is sort of like what other orgs say, that you have to have multiple contacts with a non-voter to make them a voter. And of course, that's a much more expensive proposition.
Yes, there is good evidence that multiple touches helps.
Yes, yeah. So super quickly, because I know we're running out of time. 2022, a few things. One is around language. We've gotten some questions around, are you changing the language in states where there's been voter suppression laws changed? You brought up mail-in ballots. And the other question is, are you going to address like voter misinformation that's gone out there? We know that that's had a very negative effect on voting, and it's been very targeted, to voters in certain states. So are you going to be addressing that in your messaging in 2022?
So there is an experiment that I've wanted to do for a long time, which is to provide more detail about not just that you should vote, but also how to vote. And I do want to do that test. There is also some countervailing evidence, though, that I've just recently been reading that there's at least a little bit of suggestive evidence that if you give people two options about how they should vote, it actually can depress turnout because they think, oh, this is complicated. I don't want to have two options. I would rather just have one option. So we want to be very careful about that kind of thing, both because if we're going to include any details about how to vote, it becomes imperative for it to be 100% accurate all the time. And that's a little challenging especially because the rules can change out from under us. So it can be a little bit dangerous. And I think there is some risk that it would have the opposite of the intended effect, but we are interested in exploring it. And we have done a little bit of that. The way we would probably do it is through a partnership with another organization that has expertise in making sure that their voter communications are rigorously compliant and precise, because that takes kind of a whole other legal and apparatus to make sure that you're doing it well. So potentially, the answer is potentially only after testing it and probably in partnership with groups that have some expertise on that front.
Great. Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so last question, because I know we're very tight on time, but I just have to ask it. Donna asked, and it's a really good one. You were talking about getting into, the state and local election piece. So can we hear a little bit about that? Donna's question was around the governor's races in Michigan and Wisconsin. And I guess I'm also would love to hear a little bit about that down ballot effect, because as we all know, the down ballot effect from Biden was a negative, unfortunately, and we have to change that. So, would love to hear if you're kind of getting in on that action too, to get people to, go down the ballot as well.
Yeah. So coincidentally, the bilingual campaigns that we are running we've just mailed all the letters for, those are the first time that VoteForward has participated in a mayoral election. And it will be really interesting to see what kind of effect we have there. If that looks promising, I think it's very likely that we will continue to experiment with down ballot races. The other place where we have some interest is in focusing on DA and sheriff races, because we think that those issues are very salient, and potentially an opportunity to call attention to the stakes of the local election. I have this theory that people don't generally understand how important their mayor, city council, and state legislative races are. And I would really like to find a way to help with that problem. I'm not sure what the answer is. I have some ideas that I've been noodling on. But again, I think this is an area where we have a lot of appetite and interest, and we haven't historically had a ton of capacity to explore it, but we'd like to.
We might have a couple. Do you mind staying on for 1 minute? We might have a couple of raised hands.
I'm fine. I'm happy to stay. So let's do the raised hands too.
Okay. I can't see it. I'm sorry. Oh wait,
I think
Steven's got a question.
Steve
Great.
had one, and Ida, I think, has
Oh,
one.
great. Okay, thanks.
I had a question. The first part you touched on was on the residual effect. Do you create habitual voters out of these sporadic voters? And also recently in a postcard results conversation similar to this, they talked about household effect, that people that were convinced to vote also influence their household and other members, voting members of their household, to go out and vote. And I was wondering if you'd ever thought anything about that or done any research on those areas.
Once again, this is a place where I think the answer is we've thought about it, and we would like to, but the upshot of one of my earlier slides, staff of 4 also means research staff of 1. My heroic colleague, Emily, is the only person designing and analyzing experiments right now. And so I think there's probably some data even from experiments that we've done in the past, that we could glean some conclusions from on that question, household effects, and sorry, what was your other question? Household effects and habituation.
Residual effect.
Yeah. We probably have data that we could learn something from already, but those are also both active areas where we would like to do more research.
And Ida, did you have a question too? Do you want to chime in?
Yeah, hi. Thanks very much. I really enjoyed this presentation. I have 2 questions. One is the difference between the letters and the postcards. Many of us are also involved in postcard programs, and I was curious if you had any thoughts on which one is more effective. And the other thing I thought was fascinating that you mentioned is about the effect on us, the letter writers. And I really felt in my community, it created a real solid community. And I hear other people talking about that too, who has 25, who has this and that. And it's a moment of dialogue for us, the letter writers. And I haven't had a chance to do it this cycle because of other commitments I have. I've just been writing letters myself, but I find that when I actually do it in a group, it's much more enjoyable and obviously multiplies what I'm able to do. So those two questions, the difference between the postcards and also the effect on the letter writer themselves.
Yeah, so on the first one, my best understanding of the research suggests that letters are indeed quite a bit more effective than postcards. I want to be a little bit careful because we're friendly with the various groups that do postcards as well. But just to state the facts as I know them, the biggest randomized trial from postcards last year, the Postcards to Swing States project, reported an effect size of 0.07 percentage points. So a little less than 1/10 of the effect size from a letter. There was an arm of that experiment that reported 0.14, so a little bit more. And as I said, that's a good result for a presidential year. I don't mean to disparage it. But based on our best reading of the evidence, letters do seem to be really quite substantially more effective. I'm not sure why that is. My theory is that they're a little bit harder to ignore, and also that they look a little bit more like they took some extra time and effort to produce, which indeed they did. There's also an aspect where I'm pretty sure that the raw data that we use and some of the data pipeline that we've built is a little bit more sophisticated. So for instance, we have a way to pull out of the campaigns on a continuous basis anybody who moves or who votes early. And so there's various sort of subtle but important efficiency effect things that we're able to do in the data pipeline that I think make them more effective. I don't mean to overstate this. It's still an open area of interest for us too to understand it better. But we do feel pretty confident that specifically the letters that we write through VoteForward do seem to work better than postcards. And then to your other question, Ida, I really love that part of it. I find that I've had the same experience, that it's both more fun and more, and you do more when you're doing it with other people. And so that's maybe another area where I'm interested in innovating on the product side. So for instance, there isn't really any public profile on the VoteForward website for a letter writer. Like if I wanted to have a page that included the message that I send, and also maybe some statistics about how many of them I've written, that other people could sign up through, and I could maybe see that. That's the kind of thing we want to consider building over the next couple of years. Ida, did you have a follow-up question? It looks like your hand is still raised.
No, those are my questions. I didn't take the hand down. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, great.
All right, well, that wraps us up for today. I thank you. Scott Forman, you are one of our great heroes. We're just so proud of you and your work, and that we could work together on all these things. So thank you so much for coming again and being a part of the Big Tent and helping us to help you. And
of course, happy
we all adore you.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's very sweet. Thank you.
Yeah.
And mutual. Great. The feeling is mutual. Thank you all so much again for everything that you did last year.
Let's keep working together. And yeah, this is fantastic.
All right.
And I thank all of you for coming, and I thank you all for your letter writing, and please keep up the good work. If you have any questions, be in touch with us, put it in the chat. Let us know if we can help you to keep those letters coming, keep Virginia going. And remember, next week, we are going to gather at the same time, same channel, same bat channel, and we're going to be learning about, well, personally, what we can do about the AT&T problem. But we're going to have this great tent talk, Emiliana Guerca from the Women's March Action. And so be here next week and look again at the link. We've posted the link for donations to VoteForward. I hope you'll all think about that, and we'll all keep you in our thoughts. And goodbye, everybody.
Thank you.